Hello and welcome back to the Hazzabhajan YouTube channel. It is Harry here, and today it is time for another installment in my Nation Roulette series where I profile football in various countries across the globe. And today's country to be featured is the 2018 World Cup finalist, Croatia. If you want to check out any of the other Nation Roulette episodes that I've done thus far, I've covered countries ranging from India to Tuvalu, Kyrgyzstan to Colombia, and the Central African Republic to Mongolia. There is a playlist link in the description down below. And whilst you are there, hit the like button if you enjoy this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. But for now, let's explore the footballing scene and footballing history in the former Yugoslav nation of Croatia. Croatia is, quite famously, an extremely beautiful and scenic country that borders Hungary, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro, as well as being on the Adriatic Sea, something which gives it close trade and relations to Italy. It covers 56,594 square kilometers of land, and it has an estimated population of just under 3.9 million people, although this is down from 4.2 million as per the 2011 census. The Croats moved into the region during the 6th century, although it was taken over by a Hungarian dynasty in 1102, and it ended up losing a lot of territory, firstly to Venice and then to the Ottoman Empire, over the following centuries. It then became a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire during the 1880s, being predominantly ruled over by Hungary once again, but not long after the empire's dissolution, it formed the kingdom of Slovenes, Croats and Serbs with, as you might have been able to guess, Slovenia and Serbia. That would then turn into the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia after World War II, alongside a few other nations such as Montenegro and Bosnia and Herzegovina, but in 1991, Croatia seceded from the region in quite a violent manner, which we'll get onto later. Football has always been the most popular sport in the country by some distance, although there is also a great interest in sports such as basketball and tennis, especially when Croatian athletes are doing rather well. Football was apparently first brought to the region in 1873 by English expatriates, where it was played in the port region of Zadar and in the city of Rijeka, although it wasn't until the 1900s that the first official football clubs would be formed. By 1912, while still under the Habsburg control, they had established their own football federation, which would later be absorbed into the Yugoslav Umbrella Federation. Unlike the other two former Yugoslav nations that I've covered in this series thus far, namely Montenegro and Slovenia, Croatian clubs featured heavily in the Yugoslav First League during its existence. Whilst they didn't quite match up to the two Serbian giants of Red Star Belgrade and Partizan Belgrade, Hajduk Split still managed to win 7 Yugoslav First League titles and Dinamo Zagreb picked up 4, and neither of those two teams were relegated, with the only season they both missed being 1991-92, by which point Croatia was no longer a part of Yugoslavia, and as such, Croatian clubs were not allowed to compete in the Yugoslav football leagues. Concordia Zagreb and Gradanski Zagreb, the latter of whom being a predecessor to Dinamo Zagreb, also won a combined 7 Kingdom of Yugoslavia League titles between 1923 and 1940. However, both of them, alongside virtually all other Yugoslav clubs at the time, were disbanded immediately following World War II's conclusion, owing to them having taken part in the wartime league, which took place whilst the region was under puppet fascist control, and the new communist regime did not think that having sports clubs with links to the fascist era of Yugoslavia was particularly appropriate. Croatia's players formed integral parts of the Yugoslav national team too, with 6 of the 10 most capped Yugoslav internationals of all time hailing from Croatia, including the likes of goalkeeper Vladimir Bera, winger Branko Zebec and striker Stjepan Bobek. Bobek was also the top goal scorer for Yugoslavia during its existence, as he netted 38 goals in just 65 games for them throughout the 1940s and 1950s, and no one managed to overhaul his tally prior to the region's collapse. Following Yugoslav President Josip Tito's death in 1980, a growing tide of nationalism started to sweep throughout Croatia, something which was compounded when, in the 1990 election, which was the first multi-party election permitted in the country for some time, the right-wing pro-independence candidate Franjo Tuđman was sworn in as president. Tuđman, who ironically enough had been a director of Partizan Belgrade earlier in his life before switching his allegiances to Croatia, and more specifically Dinamo Zagreb, established the Croatian constitution in December 1990 and started to use sport as a key part of propagating national identity, even saying that, quote, "Football victories shape a nation's identity as much as wars do," close quote. This had a monumental effect, with Croatian fans in attendance of a Yugoslavia game against the Netherlands in June 1990 actively booing their own players and manager and cheering on the Dutch. And a few months later, the Hajduk Split fans burned the Yugoslav flag and raised the checkered red and white of the Croatia flag as an act of protest. Perhaps the most notorious incident, though, came during a game between Red Star Belgrade and Dinamo Zagreb on the 13th of May 1990, just 6 days after Tudjman had won the election. Tensions between the two sets of fans had already been heightened after the previous year's encounter, as they shouted racist abuse at each other throughout the game. The Red Star Ultras, nicknamed Dedijer, translated as heroes in English, and led by notorious ultra Arkan, had apparently destroyed a train on its way to Zagreb prior to the game, and the Bad Blue Boys, Dinamo's most prominent ultra group, threw rocks at the Red Star fans upon them entering the stadium. The Dedijer responded in kind, tearing up the stadium and threatening to kill both the supporters and Tudjman, and before long it became a full-on battle, with even players and police getting involved. Dinamo's captain, Zvonimir Boban, broke a police officer's nose after the officer had insulted him, and several other Dinamo players were heavily involved in that particular battle, whilst Red Star, who would go on to win the European Cup the following year, retreated to the changing rooms and had to be escorted out of the stadium by helicopter. The match never took place, and there is a tribute inscribed at Dinamo's stadium which reads, "To the supporters who began the war with Serbia in this ground on the 13th of May 1990. Whilst it is a stretch to say that this particular event instigated the Yugoslav Civil War, a conflict which would see over 140,000 people killed, it certainly showcased the rampant animosity between the two sets of nations at that time. However, the Bad Blue Boys did form a significant part of the Croatian army during the war, because as they saw it, supporting Dinamo Zagreb meant being a Croat, and therefore they had to fight for the cause. In June 1991, Croatia declared their secession from Yugoslavia, and as mentioned earlier, their teams didn't compete in the 1991-92 Yugoslav First League as a result, although at that point, I'm sure that who could win the Yugoslav Football League was the least of the country's concerns. They would end up losing a significant portion of their land to Yugoslav forces during the Civil War, but eventually the UN intervened and halted the conflict, and Croatia were recognised as an independent nation internationally in 1992. Tudjman remained popular with most of Croatia until he made the decision to rename Dinamo Zagreb to Croatia Zagreb, as he saw Dinamo as a name which symbolised the communist era. This led to most Dinamo fans refusing to attend games, with attendances sinking from 15,000 before the conflict to just 1,000, and they turned on Tudjman and his party as they lost in the Zagreb local elections, especially since every other party involved pledged to change the name back to Dinamo. When the news broke that Tudjman had terminal cancer, the Dinamo fans chanted, "Tick tock, Tudjman has cancer," and he was never able to get those fans back on his side before his death in December 1999. Another element of the ultra groups in Croatia is the fascist chanting that has become more commonplace at Croatian grounds in the last couple of decades. They have been known to form swastika symbols in the crowds and make monkey chants at black players, perhaps most prominently at Euro 2004 in their game against Portugal. The most well-known example of this, though, is their chant "Za dom spremni," translated as "Ready for the Homeland," which is a slogan linked to the fascism era during World War II. In 2013, defender Josip Siminic, who was once infamously shown 3 yellow cards by Graham Poll in a match against Australia at the 2006 World Cup, led the chant upon their qualification to the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, shouting "Za dom" through a megaphone, to which the crowd responded with a very loud "Spremni." FIFA eventually deemed the incident to be racist, and despite Siminic pleading his innocence and ignorance to the context of the chant, he was banned from competing at the World Cup. I don't think the cry of ignorance is particularly relevant here, given that Siminic would go on to provide funding for a film which spread the message that Croatia did not play a significant role in the Holocaust, which was categorically dismissed by historians. Anyway, moving on from that and back to the actual national team, which played its first match against the USA in October 1990, which they won 2-1. It took them nearly 2 years after that match to affiliate themselves with FIFA, meaning that they weren't eligible to take part in qualification for the 1994 World Cup as a result. Interestingly, during World War II, when the country was essentially under fascist control in all but name, a Croatian team had actually played a few matches as an independent country, including a 4-0 win over Switzerland in their debut game in 1940. They also joined FIFA as the independent state of Croatia in 1941, although of course, once the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia had been established, their FIFA membership was immediately dissolved and only reinstated some 51 years later. The independent nation made its tournament debut at Euro '96 in England, and they made a good impression, with a squad boasting the likes of Slaven Bilic, Robert Prosinecki and Davor Šuker finishing second in their group behind Portugal before losing to eventual winners Germany in the quarterfinals. 2 years later, their maiden bout at a World Cup would go even better, as they made it all the way to the semi-finals, with Šuker scoring 6 goals throughout the tournament to win the Golden Boot. They did fall to the hosts and eventual winners of the tournament, France, in that semi-final encounter, but they made up for that defeat somewhat with a victory over the Netherlands in the third place playoff. Ever since then, they've only failed to qualify for one edition of each tournament, as they missed Euro 2000 in Belgium and the Netherlands and the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, but no others. Whilst they have never bettered their Euro 96 showing in any of their 5 subsequent Euros appearances, including falling 5-3 to Spain in a thriller at last year's Euros in the round of 16, they did manage to better their World Cup 98 run 4 years ago in Russia. After dominating a group including Nigeria, Iceland and Argentina, including a comprehensive 3-0 demolition job of the latter team, they got past both Denmark and Russia on penalties before ending England's hopes of World Cup glory with a 2-1 extra time victory in the semi-finals. They would ultimately fall short in the final as they lost to France 4-2, but they returned home as national heroes and were greeted by a plethora of celebrating fans when they came home. They've also confirmed their place at the 2022 World Cup in Qatar after finishing 1 point ahead of Russia in Group H of European qualifying, although a repeat performance of 2018 does seem unlikely. In their other 3 World Cup appearances that they have made, they were knocked out in the group stages on all 3 occasions, so clearly they have a relatively turbulent relationship with FIFA's showpiece event. The only trophies they have won in their history are the 1996 King Hassan II tournament, which was held in Morocco, and the 1999 Korea Cup, which was the last edition of that particular competition, so technically speaking, they may well forever be the holders of that particular trophy. And no, before you ask, I have no idea why they were invited to take part in both of those tournaments either, but hey, at least it's some silverware, which is more than can be said for quite a significant number of national teams. Their current captain and talisman Luka Modric, who was voted as the best player of the 2018 World Cup and won the Ballon d'Or that year to boot, is the nation's most capped player of all time, with 146 caps to his name as of the time of this recording, and Šuker is their record goalscorer on 45. Their record win was a 10-0 trouncing of Minos San Marino, which I believe is the first time they featured in this series, but do correct me if I'm wrong, and a 6-0 annihilation by Spain in the Nations League in 2018 is their worst ever defeat. They completed a remarkable rise in the FIFA rankings between 1994 and 1999, when they rose up from 125th in 1994, their lowest position of all time, to 3rd by 1999, no doubt aided by their stunning World Cup display the previous year, and they currently sit in a very respectable 15th place. The women's national team, sadly, are nowhere near close to the level of the men's team. Their first game came back in 1993 when they lost 3-2 to Slovenia, but they have failed to qualify for a single international tournament in their entire history, having never really come close in any of their qualification attempts, if truth be told. They are still technically speaking in contention to qualify for the 2023 World Cup in Australia and New Zealand, but it would require nothing short of a miracle, as they sit 11 points behind second place Italy with just 4 games left to go in the group. Now we move on to a discussion about their league, and the Croatian First Football League, or the Hrvatski Prva Liga as it is known in Croatia, and I apologise for the butchering of that name, was set up in 1991 upon Croatia's secession from Yugoslavia. The first season was only a half campaign from February to June 1992, so they could return to a summer-spring calendar from the following year, but the league has been running uninterrupted ever since then, even managing to conclude the 2019-20 campaign in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic, temporarily putting a stop to football in the country for a few months. It has remained at 10 teams since the 2013-14 season, and one of those teams makes it to the Champions League qualifying rounds every season, obviously those being the league winners. Second and third in the league go into the Conference League, the Cup winners enter the Europa League, and one team is relegated each season. Dinamo Zagreb are by far and away the country's most successful side post-independence, with 22 titles to their name at the time of recording, including all bar one of the previous 16. This is in no small part thanks to the influence of Zdravko Mamic, a convicted tax evader who was originally a part of the Bad Blue Boys before being elected as president of Dinamo in 2003 and then the vice president of the Croatian Football Federation in 2007. I think you can probably see where this is going. He would go on to essentially control transfers into and out of the country, as well as sorting out national team matters and picking referees for domestic games, whilst taking most of the money for himself before giving some of it to Dinamo. This has meant that the competitive edge of the Croatian league has all but vanished, with only scraps of cash being left for the other teams, and it's perhaps little surprise that 8 out of the 40 teams that have competed in the Croatian First League since 1992 have since been dissolved, with 7 more playing below the 3rd tier. Hajduk Split, Zagreb's most hated rivals, are second on that list with 6, although they haven't picked up a league title since 2005. They famously refused to play Dinamo in 2014 in protest against their decision to ban Hajduk fans from attending the match, with some being held up by police to prevent them from entering the stadium. Indeed, Hajduk were banned by Mamic from having any of their members on the Croatian Football Federation's board and have been known to receive much harsher punishments for any indiscretions they cause. This then led to an incident in the game between Croatia and Izdi in 2014, where flares were thrown onto the pitch by Croatian fans, despite their team winning at that point, in protest against how the Croatian Football Federation was run, although it didn't really work, if truth be told. Eventually, Mamic was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 6 years in prison in 2018, although he then became a fugitive, fleeing to Bosnia and Herzegovina, who have refused to extradite him, and he hasn't returned to Croatia since the punishment was announced. The other 2 teams to win a championship during the independent era are Rijeka in 2017 and NK Zagreb in 2002. Once again, Dinamo top the table right now, with a 6-point lead over Osijek in 2nd. It's a similar story with the Croatian Cup too, as Dinamo have hoovered up 16 of those trophies thus far, with Rijeka and Hajduk Split winning 6 apiece and Osijek and Inter Zaprešić lifting the other 2 that have been competed and completed to date. In summary, Croatian football is a bit of a mess, with funds having been siphoned off to suit those in power as opposed to the actual clubs, and racist and fascist chants still commonplace to this day in stadiums. But the national team is still thriving for now. How long can they keep it up before the house of cards inevitably falls down? And that just about wraps up today's video looking at the footballing scene in Croatia. If you enjoyed this video, of course, as I said at the start, please don't forget, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already, and ring the notification bell to get notified whenever I upload a video straight away. And if you want to check out any of the other Nation Roulette episodes that I've done thus far, you can check out all of them using the playlist link in the description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.